In this next video in Sage Intacct's core system series, we're going to be discussing document sequencing. Document sequencing can be found at top level, under applications, under company, under setup, and then under settings here. You'll notice you'll see document sequencing. There is a lot of default sequences that come with the system already set up for you. And these sequences will range from items that we would consider master file items like employees, vendors, projects, customers, to actual transactional document numbering like receivable invoices, change requests, purchase orders. So you're going to get a wide variety of defaults already set up in the system. Best practice would be to use these defaults as much as possible, especially during the beginning stages of your deployment. As you go through the process, when you get into testing, you're going to be able to play around with these a little bit more and see which sequences work best for you. If we go into one of these, we'll take a look at what you can do inside them. Let's grab the vendors, for example, and we'll go to edit. Inside here, you're going to be able to give it an ID and sequence, a sequence length, how long is it going to be? Is it active or not? And the ability to put in different things like a prefix, a separator, and a suffix. You can get pretty complex. We would recommend keeping it as simple as possible, but giving you enough flexibility. How many vendors do we set up per year? Figure that out, into the future, and go ahead and set that up. So you'll see the default vendor one is going to put a V prefix in, 5 digits long, and it's going to show you down here the next available number. So in my system, I already have some vendors set up. So it's saying my next unused sequence is 201. So that means I must have 200 vendors already in my system. Now, one thing you'll notice here is you can change these. So, if you get close to running out of numbers, you can come into here and reset it. You can add a 6th digit. You can change the number structure. You can reset this. A lot of times, during the data import stage, this number is going to get out of sequence. And unless you reset it back, you're going to get some error messages that says, hey, you can't create a vendor number. Well, if that's the case, this is where you're going to go in and look and go ahead and fix it. Okay, so you're going to be able to add and change the sequences as you go throughout the system. So you're not locked into it. A lot of older legacy systems, you're locked into your structure. And once you hit it, you're in trouble and it requires a key change or something like that. But not in this case. So we'll go ahead and get out of this right here. And, the next thing is, okay, well, where does the system know to use this number sequence? And that's going to be found in 2 main areas in the system. First, in each of the module's configurations, you're going to have the ability to say which sequence to use. So, for example, in accounts payable, and we'll go into this, you're going to be able to go into the configuration, and there'll be a document sequencing section where you can say, use this vendor sequence. And then same thing for documents. Most of your documents you'll find during your deployment are going to be generated through what we call our transaction definition modules. That will be order entry, purchasing, inventory control. And in here, we're going to have the ability to go into our transaction definitions and link individual document sequencing by transaction definition. And we'll go ahead and show you some of those next. So let's go over to, and again, I'm at top level, and let's go to company, and let's go into accounts payable here. And you'll notice every module has a configuration area, and typically it's under setup, configuration. So accounts payable, if I go to accounts receivable, setup, configuration. And inside there is where those definitions are going to reside. So if I go into accounts payable, setup, configuration, you're going to be going through each of these individual areas in the system. You can shrink these down, or you can just scroll down. And what you're looking for is a section called document sequencing, which is right here. And each module will give you a little help menu here. So you can definitely read through this, and it'll give you some tips and things like that. But you can clearly see here that there's 3 things I can actually set with document sequencing: AP credit adjustments, AP debit adjustments, and vendors. And so you'll see in here, these are already linked to the default ones in the system. So this is the link that I saw earlier in the main area. If you want to see what that looks like, you can go to it in the first section in companies that I was already at, or you can come right here, click on your drop down and click view. And once you're in view here, you can see what the sequence is. And you'll notice this looks familiar to what we looked at earlier. And you'll also have the ability to click on the edit button and change it right there. All right, so keep that in mind. And for now, we'll go ahead and leave those alone. This is one area here where some people do like to separate. So by default, they give you one document numbering for a credit adjustment and a debit adjustment. Some people like to have them broken out by APC, APD, have a different adjustment. So this is where you could actually create a new one and add one in here. We'll also look later on where you can have a different numbering sequence per entity. So right now we're at the top level. So this is going to default these sequences for all your entities in the system. And in most cases, people just use that and it just goes ahead and creates a consecutive number. But if you do want the ability to have separate numbering structures based on entities, you'll see later where we can go into the configuration at the entity level and set up separate ones. Now, you'll also notice in some cases, it's best practice not to set a document sequence number. For example, in one area that most people do not want document sequencing in is in the projects area. So inside projects, you're typically going to set up a standard cost code list. You're going to define that number structure ahead of time, and you're going to bring that in automatically. If we create a new cost code in that structure, we really don't want to give it a consecutive number. We want to put it in the area that it's supposed to be. So in configuration in projects, you'll have document sequencing here. You go ahead and find it. Document numbering, and you'll notice they're blank. So for the project number, in a lot of cases, people want to create their own project number, and they might be unique to the type of project, and it might be a little bit complex. So they leave it blank here. Cost code and project contract. So do you have to use document numbering sequences? No, you don't. In any case, you could leave it blank. And if you do, the system will then prompt you for a number instead of it just pre-filling a consecutive number. So keep that in mind. Go ahead and save out of here. So the other areas that these are pre-filling in are going to be in the transaction definition area. So for example, if I want my purchase orders to be numbered a certain way, or maybe I want under orders, I want my purchase orders to have a different numbering structure than my subcontract documents. One of the nice benefits of transaction definitions is you can have separate numbering structures for each definition. And that goes for order entry too. And you'll get more training on this as we go along. So for example, you may have different types of invoices. You might have a quick bill invoice. You might have a time and material invoice. You can have different numbering structures based on every one of these transaction definitions. You can also choose not to. You can have just an invoice number that just goes across transaction definitions. So if I go into purchasing, setup, again, I'm going to be at top level. And I go into transaction definitions. And you're not going to have as many as I have here. I have some demo data, but you're definitely going to have the purchase order one. If I go into edit under purchase orders, you'll notice on the first tab, if we scroll down far enough, you'll see transaction numbering. And right now, that's defaulting to the out-of-the-box purchase orders. If I click view, that's using a 6-digit number, and it's putting a PO prefix in front of it. And again, best practice, that's pretty good. I would leave that alone for now. But if you have a unique numbering structure that you want to use for your instance, feel free to go ahead and change it, make your own. You don't necessarily need a new sequence. You can just come into here under edit and make it your own. Okay. And then you'll notice for subcontracts, I might want to really visually see those broken out. So I might want under subcontract right here, click edit. Now, and they already give you a separate one. They have a separate numbering sequence in here called subcontracts. And here that has a sub prefix on it. Okay. So you can do that. And then if we jump over real quick to order entry, setup, transaction definition. You'll come over here and you could say, all right, for my project contract invoices, I have a contract invoice numbering structure, and that goes with a CINV. And then my quick bill, which is like a free form invoice, quick bill invoice, I have a QB in front of it. You might not want this crazy of a prefix. You might just want to put an INV, use the same document sequence, regardless if it's quick bill or contract based, it just goes consecutive in your company, and that is completely fine as well. Now, the last thing we'll discuss, I mentioned it earlier, is you can have unique structures based on your entity. So let's go back into company document sequences. And, right now we have a customer sequence, and that's just right here, C0000, like 5 digits. We have different entities in the system, and they're completely separate. We want to keep them separate. We're going to set up customers at the entity level, and we want a separate numbering structure per entity. So you could come into here, and you could create one for each one of those companies. So I can say customer, call it whatever you want here. I'm just going to say customer-GC for the GC entity. And we'll make it 5 digits. It'll be numeric. And we just want to put that prefix, or maybe customer GC, and we'll put a dash here. And we're going to start with 1. Okay. And so you can have a customer GC. And then now you have one at the main level, but now we have a customer GC. So what we would do to add it to just that entity is we would then jump over to that entity, Timberline GC, and now you'll be able to go back into the configuration. And what you'll notice is a lot of the configuration is top level specific, but there is some items that are entity specific. So if I go into accounts receivables, what I did here, accounts receivable, setup, configuration, it's still available at the entity level. I could come into here, and some stuff I can't change, right? But if I go down far enough to my sequencing, if we can find it here, I can change all that. I can make a different invoice numbering structure. But you'll see here, customers, I could flip that to customers GC. Save that. So now what happens is if I am entering a customer at the entity level, and I hit the plus button, first of all, you'll know there's sequencing turned on if you see a new here. If you have to fill out the ID, that means you don't have it turned on for this section. But if you see new, it's telling you it's going to assign it here. And let's just call it test GC customer. I'm not going to go through and fill all this stuff out. I do think it wants terms. So I'm going to go ahead and put some terms in. And I'll just come into here and hit save. So what's going to happen now is it's going to bring me back to my list. And you'll notice now it has all the customers that are already in my system, which are at the top level. But if I sort this now, you'll notice there's my new structure that it's set up, CGC 0001. Now, just to show you, I'm going to go back to top level. You could be in a different entity. But if I set up a new customer at the top level, or actually into the other entities at this point, it'll use the other numbering structure. So we'll call it test to customer. Put some terms in. Save. And that one, if I filter this to descending order, there it is. And it's still using the other number structure. Now, it's a little different on the transaction definition side of things. You can do this. You're still going to do the transaction numbering sequences at the top level. So, for example, you might want a different invoice number structure based on the entity that you're working in. So in the top level, and you're going to see all this setup information in the transaction definition classes. But if I go into my setup at top level for transaction definitions, and I go over to here to my quick bill, I'm going to click edit. You have that default numbering structure here, but you'll notice over in your transaction definitions, you're going to have an entity settings tab. And in here, it will pre-fill down and use this for all the entities, unless you come into here and say, for GC, I want to use this numbering sequence. Now you're going to want to set it up ahead of time. You can add on the fly here, but I'm just going to pick something else. And you could come down here and have a completely separate numbering structure for every entity in your system. And while we're here, just make a note, mental note, you can also have a separate document. So a different invoice form for each entity here as well. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit on your document sequencing. And like I said, best practice, leave it to the defaults for now, but you can go ahead and play around with this and change it at any time. Thank you.